Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our Naturalist Notes webinar series. My name is Susie Fortner, and I am the Programs and Operations Director with Friends of the Dunes. I'm going to have my co-host come on and introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Daisy Ambrispedes, and I am the Outreach Manager here at Friends of the Dunes.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Sorry, just making my slides progress here. Okay, I'm going to start with a quick land acknowledgement. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that the lands that we inhabit and the environments that Friends of the Dunes works to conserve are located in the unceded territory of the Wiyot people, which includes the Wiyot tribe, the Bear River Rancheria, and the Blue Lake Rancheria. Wiyot people continue to be stewards of the coastal environment surrounding Wigi, the Humboldt Bay, as they have been since time immemorial, including the Wadal coastal dunes located between Wigi and Shoor, the Pacific Ocean. One of the ways in which we can honor our placement within Wiyot territory is by recognizing the original names of these places, as well as the native plants and animals of these places. These native names have existed long before the violent colonization of this area and the attempted erasure of indigenous cultures and knowledge. I'm currently tuning in from my home in Jarojiji or Eureka, and I encourage you to share in the chat where you are tuning in from. And if you know the indigenous lands that you're on, you can share that as well. Now, remember, when the chat, you can toggle between communicating with just the hosts and panelists or everyone, and I encourage you to toggle that down to everyone so that we can see everyone's answers. For each webinar, we are introducing a Wiyot word of the day, and today's word, bear with me as I pronounce this, is the word for raven, which is Danat Wulu Yujit. That double R there is pronounced as a D sound. And so that is the word for raven, which the literal meaning of that word is big voice, which I thought was pretty appropriate.
Yeah, so Friends of the Dunes is a nonprofit organization dedicated to conserving the natural diversity of coastal environments through community-supported education and stewardship programs. So I'm also going to talk really quickly about some housekeeping items. Just as Susie mentioned before, please feel free to communicate amongst yourselves within the chat. Just make sure that you toggle who you're talking to using that blue box in your chat box. Please feel free also to ask questions to our presenter and do that through the Q&A little box at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat box. That way Susie and I can find those questions to ask our presenter at the end of the presentation. And last but not least, these webinars will be recorded and we will be sending those recordings out to everyone within a few days. So all proceeds from this webinar series will help fund the 2022 Coastal Naturalist Program. It's a California Naturalist Certification course. We were able to offer this program safely last year without a single COVID scare, so knock on wood on that. So we're cautiously optimistic that we can do it again in 2022.
All right, well, thanks for joining us for this second webinar in our series. We have a really great lineup, so if you only signed up for this one, I encourage you to check out some of these other topics. We've got some great ones upcoming, and we had a wonderful one last week with Justin Legg. All these webinars are being recorded, and we will be sharing the link to those videos. That'll be password protected for a couple months to just registrants of this, this webinar series. So if you're still interested in registering for the full webinar or would like to join us for another one of these webinars, you can do so by going on our website and finding the webinar series page there. Okay, so without further ado, I'm really excited tonight for our topic, to track a raven, monitoring ravens to understand their movement within Western snowy plover habitat with Janelle Chojnacki. I hope I said that right, Janelle. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and invite Janelle to come on and join us.
You said it perfectly. Thanks,
Yay.
Susan. Okay, so I will start sharing my screen. Okay. So hi, everyone. Susie and Daisy, thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm really excited to talk about my research and share my knowledge of ravens and snowy plovers, and I look forward to any questions you all might have. For my own ability to focus, I will probably not be looking at the chat, but like Susie mentioned, we should get to all the questions at the end. So I am a graduate student at HSU. I'm in the wildlife department, and this is my second year there. I have been studying ravens as they relate to snowy plovers, and this will be the second season of data I'm collecting. So I'm excited to talk both about my project, the background of it, what I'm doing specifically, and also share some preliminary results. So a quick presentation outline. I'll start with a project background, including ecology of ravens and plovers. Then I'll go into the research project, purpose and description. We'll talk about preliminary observations, and then I will conclude with the future of this project. So a quick background on Western snowy plover, both ecology and ID. We have Western snowy plovers breeding in Humboldt County, and I imagine that a lot of people here in this presentation have either seen them or really want to see them because they are incredibly cute, really charismatic with their big eyes and tiny bills. There are a couple species here locally that look a lot like Western snowy plovers, and I've included photos of those birds here. So we've got the Western snowy plover here on the left side, the sanderling in the middle, and the Western sandpiper on the right. All of these birds have black legs, black bills, white bellies, and beige kind of sand colored backs and heads. But you can see that the Western snowy plover has black patches on its face and neck. This bird pictured here is a male, but the females have just slightly smaller black patches as well. And then the Western sandpiper and sanderling both lack those black patches, with the sanderling being much more gray and the Western sandpiper having dark streaks through its feathers. And so like I mentioned, we've got Western snowy plovers breeding here. They are federally listed endangered species. They're listed in 1993, which if you're not familiar with that term, means their populations aren't doing very well, and we've started protecting them to help boost their populations. Western snowy plovers are a subspecies of the snowy plover, and they breed from Washington to Baja California. I'm gonna move this menu bar. Okay. So a little bit more about Western snowy plover life history. This is a nest here, this big picture on the left, and it is what I live, eat, and breathe in the summer months as I try to look for them. They are really hard to find, and you can probably imagine if you were to zoom out from this picture a little bit, it would be incredibly camouflaged on the sandy beaches of Humboldt County. Snowy plovers lay 3 eggs, and they're really well disguised. They just make little scrapes in the sand, put some pebbles in them, and then that's kind of it for their nest. And that plus their plumage kind of shows how much snowy plovers rely on crypsis. So that means camouflage with their environment. When snowy plovers are incubating their eggs, which means they're sitting on and they're providing warmth to help those chicks develop in their eggs. They rely on detecting predators when the predators are far away, and then the adults will sneak away and leave the camouflage nest to, fend for itself, but they're relying on that camouflage. And then they'll come back when the predator is gone. And then we've got a chick up here on the right side, upper right. Snowy plover chicks are precocial, which means that when they hatch, they are really independent. They can feed themselves, though they do still rely on their parents for detecting predators and for providing warmth. And then here on the bottom, we've got an adult snowy plover. This photo is from the winter. In the winter, especially the females lose all the black on their faces. The males can lose that also, but they still got those really big eyes that differentiate them from sanderlings and western sandpipers. And you can also see, I've got it circled here, this snowy plover has color bands. So the western snowy plovers here along the Pacific coast, and especially in Humboldt, are really closely monitored. And one of the ways we monitor them is through these color bands, which help us identify individuals. And that can be really crucial for figuring out things like survival. So how long is a bird surviving? If they're not surviving as long as we'd like them to, or we would expect them to, what's causing that mortality, and where are they moving? So when they hatch, are they staying in the same area? When they breed, are they staying in the same area over time? If they move, why are they moving? Maybe their nest didn't make it, so they try a new location. So having these birds uniquely marked provides a lot of really useful information. Now I'll talk a little bit about raven ecology. So pictured here is a raven in the background and a crow in the foreground. These two species can be tricky to identify, but it's very possible to do. You can see, even though the raven's in the background, it's much larger than the crow. They're about 1.5 times bigger than crows. And then you can also see some really interesting differences in their bill morphology. So the raven in the background has a much bigger bill. It's a lot wider at the base towards the bird's head, and it kind of flows from the forehead down, versus the crow, which has a pointier bill. And there's also a lot of differences in the calls that they make, with the crow being the more typical, like caw, caw, and then the raven is more guttural. And there's behavioral differences as well. Humboldt County is pretty exceptional in that we get really large groups of ravens, but throughout almost everywhere else in the ravens' home ranges, they tend to be just in pairs. But as I'll get into, kind of the background for this project was the abundance of food resources that we have in Humboldt County. And it just makes it so territorial pairs can't defend all that food. There's just so much food, it doesn't make any sense to try to fend off other ravens. And so we get a really dense number of territorial pairs, and we also get a lot of young ravens that will flock together in social groups. They're looking for friends, they're looking for mates, and they're kind of figuring their lives out. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. And that's why we get a lot of ravens here. And the ecological role of ravens, I think a lot of us probably enjoy watching ravens. They're really smart. They do a lot of really interesting behaviors. They'll like jump back at what seems like nothing. They're interacting with each other a lot. They also interact with a lot of other species, including probably a lot of our dogs. And they also have really important ecological roles. So ravens are scavengers. They eat a lot of dead things. And that's important because without them and a lot of the other scavengers, we'd have a lot more dead stuff just sitting around. And they also are part of the natural system of checks and balances. So this picture in the middle here is a raven mobbing. I think that's a red-tailed hawk. And then the picture to the right of that is a raven in turn being mobbed by a smaller songbird, maybe an oriole or something. So they keep other predators in check, and they are also kept in check by their prey as well as other predators themselves. And then where I tie these two species in together, so snowy plovers and ravens, like I mentioned, are part of the whole ecology of a natural ecosystem, and they both have really important roles in the dune ecosystems in Humboldt and throughout their ranges. However, like I mentioned, western snowy plovers are a threatened species. They're not doing so well, and that is in large part due to some natural imbalances. So we have a lot of researchers studying plovers here in Humboldt County as well as throughout their range. And year after year, plover populations fail to meet recovery goals, so there just aren't enough of them. And also year after year, ravens continue to be the #1 direct cause of snowy plover nest failure. So ravens are eating their eggs, and that's causing a lack of reproductive success for the western snowy plover. This picture of the raven on the right here actually looks like it's got something in its crop. I don't think it's a plover egg, but very well could be. So I included a video. I'm not sure if it'll play, but it's kind of okay either way. Just an interesting video that I took the other month. This was in November, that points out why we have so many ravens here. So this is a pumpkin patch in Humboldt. It's in Arcata. I think what happened was these pumpkins didn't get sold for Halloween, and whoever produced them made them available for their cows, which opened them up and made them available for the ravens. And I didn't see a single crow there that day. These are all ravens. There were hundreds of them there. And if we watched it, I mean, we could watch that video again and again. There's all this really cool behavior going on there. But I included this video to point out how we intentionally or unintentionally provide a lot of food resources that ravens are able to exploit. I don't know if it was this farmer's intention to provide pumpkins for the ravens, but that's what happened. And we've got a lot of agriculture in Humboldt. We've got a lot of parking lots and trash cans. There's a lot of food resources that the ravens are able to take advantage of. And so, like I mentioned, ravens are the #1 nest predator of snowy plovers in Humboldt year after year. And we have tried really hard, management agencies and researchers have tried really hard to figure out ways to prevent that predation and to help snowy plovers breed more successfully. So this big picture here, I brought up the nest again because some things that have been tried, not in Humboldt, but in other areas where the snowy plovers breed, are emetic eggs. So these eggs have poison that make whatever consumes them throw up. So it just provides an unpleasant experience that presumably the predator would then associate with that nest, and then it would hopefully avoid predating a nest again. So this has been tried with ravens elsewhere, and what researchers do is they recreate a plover nest. They 3D print these eggs and they paint them to look just like plover eggs, and then they hope that a raven will find it, eat it, throw up, be like, that sucks, that's not worth it, I'm not doing that again, and then avoid it in the future. I think we all are probably aware of how incredibly smart ravens are. The ravens figured out how to differentiate between the fake nests and the real nests, and that technique did not work, at least in that one study. So another thing that researchers have tried is pictured here, this middle picture on the left. That's a snowy plover nest exclosure. So they put this cage around the snowy plover nests, and the plover can fit through it. It can go in and out as much as it wants, but predators can't get in. And that was pretty successful in helping the nests to hatch. However, it has been discontinued here and in a few other areas because it led to higher rates of nest abandonment. So the adults would lay their eggs, and then for whatever reason, they would abandon their nest. And then it also led to higher rates of adult mortality. So predators might figure out that, oh, there's a nest there, I can't get the eggs, but if I wait long enough, I can get the adult. And then this bottom picture here on the right represents two different things, both lethal removal of ravens and raven effigies. So we haven't done lethal removal of ravens here, and I personally am hoping it doesn't come to that, because I think that that is a really downstream approach. It doesn't get at the causal factors of why there are so many ravens here in the first place. It's also ethically questionable, and it's really expensive, but some other areas are using that technique. And also raven effigies. So an effigy would be like you have a stuffed raven either from a museum or from a carcass that you preserve and stuff, and you shape it in a way where it is very obviously dead if another raven were to see it, just like this one here. And then you put it in an area where you want ravens to stay away, because they might look at the effigy and think, oh, that raven died there, I'm not going to go there. And that worked also, but we tried, some researchers tried that in Humboldt, and it only worked at, I think it was a 50-meter distance. So it wasn't a large enough distance, and it's actually kind of surprising to me. I would have thought it would have worked really well, but it did not. So all that is to say, we still have a lot of ravens here. And oh, I'm actually going to go back to that slide because it's in the wrong place. So that's all the background of my research project. So we have a lot of ravens here. We have a lot of human food resources, and the plovers are suffering from too high rates of predation on their nests from the ravens, in addition to some other factors like habitat degradation. But I wanted to know, and this project was developed in a lot of collaboration with the management agencies that are involved in snowy plover conservation. So that includes state parks, BLM, the National Park Service, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I wanted to know where else these ravens were going, what else they were eating, because these eggs are tiny. There aren't that many of them. There's no way these ravens are only eating plover nests, but they are on the beach. Some of these ravens are predating plover nests. What else is supporting them, and why are there so many here? And so the logical way to do that was to put GPS units on the ravens and track their movement. So I got these really cool GPS units. I actually have one in my hand so you can see how big it is up close. They have solar panels on them, and I use this really strong Teflon ribbon to create a harness on the raven. And the solar panels allow them to be rechargeable, so they can last up to 3 years. And they transmit their data through cell towers. So just like our cell phones, I use an annual data plan to get the information sent, and then I get it once a day. I log into this website. It's super cool. I don't have to do, if anyone knows what telemetry is, I don't have to do handheld telemetry. I don't have to go out and find the bird. All the data just comes right to my computer, which is incredible. So I'm using these GPS units to track their movement. And now I'll go back to that slide of how I catch them in the first place. Okay, and I've got another video here that I think will work. So pictured right here on the left side, it's called a net launcher, and it literally launches a net. It uses 22 caliber blanks, so not real bullets, but they provide that same gunpowder for these things that I have been told are used to train hunting dogs. And there's a plastic crow or raven over here on the driveway, and you can see how it launches the net. So yeah, that's my net launcher. And then in reality, I have spent, I've spent the last many months, well, last summer I spent many months figuring out the most effective way to use that net launcher to catch a raven. And what I have discovered is that dog food is really good, something in a bag that the ravens have to kind of work at. And then hopefully you can't see it, but the net launcher is hidden in the bush back here. And I spend quite a bit of time covering up the net launcher so that it blends in with the shrubbery. And then I sit in my car a little distance away and I wait for the ravens to come down and get comfortable enough so where it looks like they're not going to fly right off. And then I launch the net launcher. This raven here is the first raven I caught. This was actually in field brook. And so once it's caught, it gets caught in that net. It takes just a few minutes to get it out. I keep gloves on because their bills are super strong. And this is one of those pictures that you look at and you're like, what was I thinking? Like my face was not covered at all. And that's just because ravens can recognize faces just like crows. So sometimes I go back here and I've been circled by ravens and I'm like, I gotta go. So every other raven I've caught, my face has been thoroughly covered to protect my identity. So now back to the GPS units and tracking their movements. So all of these ravens are caught on the beaches where snowy plovers breed. I time it so that I'm not interfering with snowy plover breeding activity, but I wanted to target ravens that were using these beaches on the beaches so that I knew these would be the most relevant ravens for my study. And so in addition to those GPS units, I'm also using unique color bands to identify individual ravens. You can see this raven here, which looks very sassy on the beach. This is one of my tagged ravens that I got to see in the field after I released it. So it's got a silver band on the bird's left leg, and those are bird bands that are distributed very intentionally by the US Geological Survey's bird banding lab. They have unique numbers on them. No other bird anywhere should have that same number. And then on the bird's right leg is a color band. If you can see it, the band is purple. It's kind of hard to tell, but it's got unique 2 letters on it. And the letters on this one are 2M. This bird was caught at Little River State Beach. And I actually have 4 ravens tagged there. And I'll use this time to make a plug for if any of you are out on the beaches here. I've got ravens tagged all over the place. And if you see a tagged bird, it would be so great if you could let me know. I have a website that I made for this project, humboldtravens.wordpress.com. And you can click here on report a sighting, and there's a form requesting all the data fields that I need to know. And it's just great to know what these ravens are doing when I'm not around, and can only get so much information by collecting a point every hour. So what they're doing in between and what people see them doing is really fascinating and really helpful. And even if you just see which leg has a silver band or which leg has a purple band, that's usually all I need to go by, as well as where you saw it. And the form asks for that stuff. So there's a few more aspects to this project in addition to GPS data and movement data. I'm also looking at raven diets. So these little vials contain fecal samples from ravens that were collected during processing. So while I'm handling a raven, taking measurements, weighing them, and putting on a GPS unit, a lot of them will defecate. And I collect those fecal samples to later look at them under a microscope. And I'm looking just to see what I can see. I'm sure a lot of them have seeds. It would be great if I could identify those seeds to species, or even just knowing that they're eating fruit or vegetation is useful. And then I'm sure I'll see lots of insect parts in here too. And it'll be fun to look at this sort of snapshot into a raven's diet. So these fecal samples represent what the bird was eating a few hours before it was captured. And in addition to fecal samples, I'm also using stable isotope analysis to look at a more long-term diet. So this is a little more complicated than just looking at the samples under a microscope, and requires some pretty intense lab work. Let me just start from the beginning. So birds molt at least once a year, and they do that to keep their feathers in good shape. They rely really heavily on their feathers for flying, of course, for the birds that fly, for protection from the elements like the sun and the rain, to keep them warm, and also for camouflage. I wouldn't say that ravens are camouflaged, at least not in this picture. Maybe in a dark forest they are, but some birds rely much more on camouflage. And they grow these feathers in a really predictable way. Ravens and more common species especially are really well studied to look at the timing of this molt. And ravens grow in their flight feathers just once a year. And they do it in the same pattern. Every bird does it unless for some reason they lost a feather for whatever reason, fighting with another raven or something. They grow their central tail feathers in June, and that coincides with peak snowy plover breeding season. And as they're growing in that feather, everything that they're eating in that 2 to 3 week window where they're growing in the feather gets the elements from those food items get transferred onto their feather or into their feather. And so what I do is I cut a section from the end of their tail feather, and I'll be submitting that to a lab. And then they look for specific elements and their signatures. And then I also send in items that I thought the raven might have eaten. So insects, vegetation. I'll also be sending in snowy plover samples. And then what the lab work can do is look for the signatures of the food items and see if they're present in that feather. And what that means is the raven did or did not eat that item, if it's there or not there. And so including the snowy plover is a way to see whether these ravens that I caught consumed presumably snowy plover eggs or chicks, which is really sad to think about, but it happens. And this hasn't really been done before, at least from what I can tell, because if these ravens are predating snowy plovers, it's got to be such a tiny portion of their diet that it may or may not even show up. But I'm really interested and really excited to see what comes of this. So now I'll go into some of the preliminary observations from my study. I'm getting this movement data. I'm getting it for the most part once a day, and each day I get it. It collected a point from every bird once an hour. I've got 9 ravens tagged right now, and that means data from 9 birds could come in on any given day. And it's really exciting to see where they go. Most of them are really consistent. Some of them do unpredictable things. These 2 birds right here show the sort of spectrum of home ranges that I'm seeing in these tagged birds. So the bird on the top had a really big home range, and the bird on the bottom had a really small home range. I forgot to include a scale bar here, but if you're familiar with the Eureka area, this is North Spit over here, and this is Cotton and like the Sequoia Park Zoo up there. So this bird is making some really big movements. It's flying over the bay. It spends a little bit of time, seems like it's in transition in the more urban areas of Eureka. And then it roosts every night in the forest. And then in the morning, it comes back to the North Spit and it makes it to the beach. And this is a 2 or 3 day window into this bird's life. And then on the bottom here, this is the same period of time. So about 3 days, this bird went to the beach a couple times where snowy plovers might be, but it spent the majority of its time here in Malel Dunes. And this bird actually had a nest. She was a female, and I saw her a few weeks after this with 3 fledglings, which was pretty cool to see one of my birds with GPS unit on it taking care of fledglings. And yeah, these maps, it's just exciting to get this GPS data and see sometimes real-time movement. If I'm going out to check on a bird and see what it's doing, I'll wait for the data to upload every day at noon. And right at noon, I'm right where the bird's supposed to be, and then I see it. And it's so cool that it's working. And here's another example of a movement pattern. This bird was the one making the most unpredictable movement. This bird was captured at Little River down here. And in this 3-day period, you can see it didn't even go to where it was captured. It doesn't make it to the beach, but it spent a lot of time up here. This is McKinleyville. This is actually Dow's Prairie. And then it would roost every night here in the forest. This is Green Diamond property. And then it made this huge trip to Stone Lagoon. And these points are taken every hour. So it took less than an hour to go from the forest by McKinleyville up to Stone Lagoon, and almost takes me that long to drive there. And then it came back down, and it took its time coming back down. You can see at least 3 different points here, and then eventually made it back to Dow's Prairie. And then one more example of a movement pattern that I see, and these are all different birds. So the last 4 maps I've shown you are 4 different ravens. This bird was captured at Mad River Spit. This is the spit right here. We had a lot of plover nesting activity here this year. And then this is Clam Beach up here. And this is the Coast Guard right here, Coast Guard Station in McKinleyville next to the airport. And so I included this map. I have spent a lot of time watching this bird, and this bird is super predictable. It's almost always here at the animal shelter at the Coast Guard Station, at this Vista Point parking lot, or on the spit. And that's kind of cool. Every time I go look for it, almost every time I can see it. But these yellow triangles represent areas where I have seen, while looking for this bird, I have seen people feeding ravens, or I have seen this raven feeding from sources of human food. And so it just kind of points to the availability of human food. A lot of these are really small sources, just like a single person or a single bag of food that the raven was eating from. But every time I look for this bird, I see some new source of human food available for it. And then it's right next to a beach where a lot of snowy plovers nest. So the connection there between human food sources and raven predation of snowy plover nests is, I think this is a good example of how those two things connect. So the future of this project, like I mentioned, I've got a year of data collection behind me and another season coming up, which I'm really excited about. I have 7 more units to deploy, 9 deployed right now. And so those 9 deployed units are the yellow dots on this map. And then the places where I want to deploy the next 7 units are the pink triangles. And these are all beaches where snowy plovers nest in Humboldt County. And so we've got Gold Bluffs Beach to the north, Humboldt Lagoon State Park right here, Little River, Clam, and Mad River Beach in the middle. This should say Malel Dunes, but then we've got North Spit, South Spit, Crab Park, which is a tiny park that I didn't know of before this project, and then Centerville Beach. I've tried to catch birds at some of these locations. It's all been part of the learning process, and it's a really interesting project. I feel like sometimes I'm just racking my brain and just can't figure out, for example, why I can't catch a particular raven. Like that happened at Centerville. I don't know if it's just timing or if my net launcher isn't hidden as well as I think it is. But there's a lot of brain racking involved in this project. So that's also the future of this project, more brain racking. I will also be collecting behavioral observations, and that will involve both the tagged ravens as well as untagged ravens. And the purpose of this is to figure out, when ravens are using snowy plover nesting habitat, what exactly are they using it for? And the implications of that, I think, are pretty interesting. So are these ravens foraging on snowy plover nesting habitat? Are they looking for food and finding food, or is it sort of a social place where they hang out? Little River State Beach right here in the middle is a really interesting example. Every time I go there, I count a lot of ravens. I was there doing a plover survey last week, and I counted 35 ravens, and my main goal wasn't even to count ravens. And in the example of that beach, there's a lot of agriculture directly across the highway from the beach. And so many people have told me anecdotal stories of ravens getting fed up the hill and then heading right to the beach. And when I'm at the beach, I can see ravens leaving and going directly up the hill towards that agriculture. And each of these sites has really unique features, which is an interesting part of this study. It would be one thing if these were kind of all clonal copies of the same beach, but they're not. They're all actually really different. And that will really come into play in the next part, analyzing data in regards to the future of this project. So I will ultimately have 16 tagged ravens, and that will give me 16 home ranges. So all these individual ravens are moving, and I'm collecting data, and I can look in the data and almost draw a circle around it and say, okay, these are this bird's movement points, this is that bird's home range. But the whole point of this project is to extrapolate beyond just the birds that I have captured. And to do that involves a lot of statistics and modeling. And being able to do that is, I'm still sort of learning what exactly I need to do that, but I'm really excited. And that will be coming up this semester as well as this summer. And then finally, publishing results. I just wanted to take a minute or two to talk about the publication process. I feel like there's a lot of distrust in science right now, and I wanted to use this opportunity to talk about how rigorous the scientific process is. This is my research project. I've been working on it for over a year. I have almost another year to finish it. I have an advisor, Barbara, who's here, instructors who are all helping me along the way. And then the publication process involves submitting my paper, which will probably take a few months to write, to a journal, and then it will go through peer review. So professionals in this field will review it and get back to me with comments and ideas and things to change. And then if I'm lucky, it'll just be one review, and then I'll be able to submit it. But who knows, it could take a couple of reviews, but it's a really rigorous process. And I'm excited for all of that. It's all a big learning process for me, but I'm really hoping that this project results in information and insights that are helpful for the management of snowy plovers. I hope that we can get a better understanding of the resources impacting ravens and mitigate those resources down the line. And like I mentioned earlier, with lethal removal of ravens, I don't think that's a really downstream approach that doesn't get at why we have so many ravens in the first place. And just to extrapolate beyond Humboldt County and beyond the snowy plover, ravens are problematic for a lot of species and a lot of sensitive species that are on the list of threatened and endangered species. And I'm hoping that the implications of this project are useful for other species as well. Ravens are supported by anthropogenic resources throughout their range, throughout North America. And if we can figure out a good way to mitigate those resources, I think we can help all the other species in that process. And just to conclude with the slide on how we can all help snowy plovers. So first off, avoid feeding problematic wildlife. I've been talking throughout this presentation about the ways that ravens benefit from people feeding them either intentionally, like hand feeding them or giving them dog food, or unintentionally, like that pumpkin patch. And I have a picture here in the bottom that shows a raven on a picnic table. This is a really common sight, even when one new person goes and sits down, a raven is often close to follow. And I think it's just evidence of how much food they get at picnic tables. And yeah, just the whole crumb cleanup campaign is really, really relevant here. And then second bullet point is give sensitive species space. I know a lot of people like to see snowy plovers, and seeing them from a distance is great. But just being aware of the beaches where they might be, and if they're nesting, giving them their space to nest. And if they're wintering, giving them their space to loaf. It's called loafing when snowy plovers are just hanging out on the beach. And then finally, respecting regulations, protecting snowy plovers. So these 3 pictures, on the bottom right, there's a dog chasing shorebirds. I see this all the time. And people might think, oh, it's just my dog having fun. It's just for a few minutes. But as soon as you and your dog leave, someone else is coming and doing the same thing with their dog. These shorebirds have been facing habitat degradation for decades, and there's only so much good habitat left. And it's just good to know the rules for dogs for the places that you go. And then the symbolic fencing, these 2 pictures on the bottom right for snowy plovers. This picture right here on the far right, those are the signs that we have in Humboldt that say temporary closure, snowy plover habitat. And then we've got the rope, just like these 2 pictures, that separates the area. It's called symbolic fencing because obviously you could get around it if you wanted to, but we're just asking that you don't. Trying to save that area for the plovers. A lot of times those roped off areas do contain nests or potential nesting habitat. And same thing with the shorebirds. We're trying to give them a chance at the small amount of restored habitat that's available for them. And that's all I have. Thank you all so much for listening. It's really fun to talk about my work and these fascinating species here, and happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Janelle. Gosh, what a great presentation. I didn't realize all the work that goes into capturing ravens. I've been kind of curious about it, and I have heard a little bit about it from Barbara, but I hadn't really seen that net gun, the net launcher in action.
Yeah, it's intense.
It is intense. Yeah, it's intense. And then, I mean, like, just how big and crazy ravens are, having to like protect your physical well-being from them, but then how you said you're also protecting your identity from them by wearing the masks.
Yes.
Such smart birds. And so, yeah, I swear they taunt. There's a local neighborhood one that just taunts my dog all the time.
Oh yeah, I bet.
He hates them. Cool. So yeah, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them into that Q&A box. I see Griff is already on top of that. Thanks, Griff. I also saw one in the chat, so we'll make sure to get to that question too.
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, maybe stop sharing your screen, and then we'll just see our faces here.
Okay.
Okay, well, since I'm already talking, I'll just go ahead and kick it off with Griff's first question here. How is the spreading of oyster shells on beaches helping to reduce raven predation? I think he's speaking specifically to that project down on the South Spit in the Mike Thompson Wildlife Area.
Yeah, we're also spreading oyster shell at Gold Bluffs Beach. So the idea behind the oyster shell is it's providing good habitat for the snowy plovers. They like, I didn't really go into the details of what snowy plovers are looking for in good habitat, but they really like sparse vegetation and sparse debris. And so when the oyster shell gets distributed, it's distributed in a really sparse way. And so it's trying to provide the good camouflage habitat that the plovers like. I wouldn't say it's necessarily decreasing raven predation other than indirectly through just making more habitat desirable for plovers, just kind of giving the plovers the option. But yeah, that's a good question. And I wonder was that Griff, sorry, if he was talking about Gold Bluffs Beach or South Spit.
Yeah, well, I happen to know that Griff works for state parks too, so he's probably familiar with a lot of those beaches there.
Yeah, so next Griff question. Can you go over the community science project again? What info do you need and how do you want it reported?
Oh, sure. I can put the link from my website in the chat. It sort of asks for any information that you were able to collect. I guess that all comes out in the other section, but where you were, so coordinates would be best, but a site name is also fine. So like I was at Little River State Beach and I saw a raven with a silver band on its right leg. Or I was at Gold Bluffs Beach and I saw a raven with a purple band on such and such lake. Or even if you see a lump on a bird's back, that looks like a GPS unit. Some of them get covered with feathers, but you can, especially if the bird is holding still, you can see the lump that is the GPS unit. Trying to copy and paste the website.
I'll make sure to be extra observant when I'm out at the beach.
Yeah, that would be great. Also date when you saw it and time if you have it, and then any behaviors that you observed. So especially if you see it eating something, what it was eating, or anything else you think might be helpful. So was it with a partner? That's really good to know. Or a bird that looked like it could be a partner. Anything and everything.
You just want to know everything about the ravens.
Yeah. I'll be here forever.
Okay, we got another question in the chat from Jenna that she said, really interesting presentation, thanks. How has your research been funded?
Ooh. So let's see. It's an unfunded project. Lucky for me, my advisor, Barbara, had some leftover funds from another project, and that's how we purchased the first 10 units, the first 10 GPS units. I work for state parks, and I have used some of their equipment like an ATV to get to specific sites. So that doesn't cost me anything. And then I've borrowed a good bit of gear, like the net launcher is on loan from the Institute for Wildlife Studies based out of Blue Lake. I have done a lot of reaching out to other raven researchers, and that was to learn, like, how do I do this? What should I be thinking about? And that has turned into, I got color bands sent to me, those colored leg bands from another researcher who wasn't going to use them. And then grants. I've applied for a lot of grants through organizations like the Audubon Society, the Blake Nuttall grant. That's an East Coast bird banding group, or sorry, East Coast ornithological group, and a lot of smaller grants. Like, yeah.
Nice. It's starting to sound like a nonprofit style research project. Sorry. Borrow a couple things, piece some funding together.
Yeah, which is awesome, because then like I've gotten to do a lot of networking for this project and learning along the way.
And all of us who you've been talking to we're just really interested to see the results.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see those maps of where they're going.
And the isotopes, I can't wait for those.
Oh yeah, me too.
Do you know like when you'll get those results back?
I haven't submitted those feathers yet. I should have included this. I just submitted feathers for sex identification, and I woke up one morning and I got the email that the results were in, and I had a gender reveal party. All of them were male, which is hilarious. But I think the stable isotope feathers, I think those will take a bit longer, maybe 3 to 5 weeks after I send them in. And I'm just so nervous because I only have those feathers, and once I mail them, I don't have them anymore.
Well, keep us updated on that.
Yeah, I would be happy to.
Griff has another question. Are there any raven foraging population control methods / ideas that are being discussed besides the ones that you mentioned?
A lot of things have been attempted for other species. Like there was one study that tried like a cannon blast and also captures the same way I'm capturing at roost locations, just to see if the ravens would come back. So that's a really different project, but the ravens did come back. So it kind of points out how experiences we think might be really unpleasant aren't as unpleasant as we think they are, like they won't have the impact we think they do. And same thing with my captures. I see those ravens at the exact same spot where I captured them all the time. Nothing comes to mind other than what I mentioned.
Yeah, I think just kind of being part of the plover outreach community for a while, to answer Griff's question a little bit, in other places along the breeding range, they do have some other things that they try, including hazing ravens. So I know down at, I think it's at Coal Oil Point, down in like Santa Barbara area, they've had people like shoot them with slingshots.
Oh.
And I think that has been like a grad student or a like undergrad student position where I think they have to wear like face coverings too, because they started to recognize the people with the slingshots. But yeah, that was one thing that they have done.
That's interesting. Do you know if they're having any success because it's having a big impact?
That's a good question, because I haven't really talked to those people personally. I've heard it like through other plover related meetings and things. So, and I don't know that they do it anymore.
Yeah.
But it's a good question. What came of that? We've got another question here from Charlene. Are the GPS trackings available to the public for viewing?
Hi, Mom. I can show you anytime. I will put some maps on my website. And I get, like I was mentioning, a lot of the ravens' movements are really predictable. Like they'll go to the same few areas day after day. So yeah, I could throw some of those maps on my website, but none of this is published yet. So I have to be it's like a little bit sensitive. It's like trademarking a brand or something.
Okay, I have two kind of personal short questions. One, is that net launcher like something that some company just like makes and sells, or is it like a custom net launcher machine that this institute place made in Blue Lake?
This is through a company. It's called Trapping Innovations. I think there are custom made ones available. These things the net launchers are really expensive. And I had a student helping me last year, he's the one who pointed out like, oh, I think that thing on the top that shoots out the net is the same thing that hunters use to train their dogs. And I was like, oh, could you make me one? And I don't think I could get the permits and approval to use a handmade one from someone who just tried to make it, but someone makes them.
Interesting. Okay. I just never knew it was a thing. So I'm just curious.
Yeah.
My other question is, do you name the ravens? Because you said you have like 7 of them tagged that you're following. Do you have names for them?
Yeah. I tried naming them and then I just kept using their unique leg band number to refer to them. Like I tried to go with the Norse god theme, because ravens are really big in Norse mythology, and I think there was a Loki out there, but I just haven't stuck with it. I just stuck with the numbers, and to me those are just like names. Like, oh yeah, 41 the other day. Was really really digging that trash.
True biologist at heart. Okay, so we have a question from Veronica Pedraza. Is it possible to set up a follow-up webinar in the future? I'd love to sign up for it, and good luck with your research.
Oh, thank you. I would be happy to present again. I'm so excited to share what I'm doing, and ravens are fascinating. I love talking about them with people, and I'm really excited to see what comes of it. So I'd be happy to share in the future.
Great. Yeah. I know you've got a lot more work to do, and a lot, especially that like analyzing of data. That's going to be a big chunk of it. So be interesting to hear what comes of it.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that's all the questions we have, and it's 7:01, so almost perfect timing.
I think we have one more question.
Oh, do we?
Yeah, or comment, I guess. Sandy Sommer said, very interesting presentation. I'd appreciate more about the ravens, so not as to think of them as the bad guys.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
think she's saying she appreciates that aspect of it.
Oh, okay. I was going to say I wasn't trying to paint them as the bad guys. I mean, it's really our fault. Ravens they're just taking advantage of what they can.
Yeah, opportunists for sure.
Yeah. Not to paint us as the bad guys. Oh, can't win.
Oh, we did have one more question come in here. Will the harness be able to be removed, or will it stay on for question mark?
I am trying to recatch ravens right now. Some of them have feathers covering the solar panels that prevents their GPS unit from recharging. And so I'm trying to catch them and fix their harness. And I had been thinking I would just recatch the birds after my project was over to do that, to remove the harness. It is, I don't know if I've ever done anything harder in my life. It is so hard to try to recatch them. I haven't had any success yet. I've come really close. So I will sure try to recatch them to get the harness off. I'm really hoping that I'll be able to do that, but I'm not sure. I will say I've been watching some of these ravens for 8 months after putting the harness on them, and they are doing great. They're having nests and fledglings, and they're flying great, they're eating, and they're generally being silly and ridiculous.
Thanks. Yeah, and I imagine they're just so smart that once they get caught by that net launcher, I'm sure they're just a little more wary.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them will be totally fine with their partner coming in and eating the bait. When I try to catch the original bird, they'll just watch from a tree as their partner eats the bait. I'm like, come on.
So smart.
I wonder if they can smell you, if that's like a thing.
It's interesting because birds, in ornithology, we're taught most birds do not have a sense of smell at all. And that, along with a lot of other things, we're starting to change our knowledge base on. So I want to say ravens probably don't smell very well. They are scavengers though, but I feel like I don't smell that strongly. I'd like to think.
Well, yeah, who knows? Sounds like you're learning a lot through this project. Maybe you'll figure out what they're queuing into.
Yeah.
And it is 7:05, so I think we're gonna call it here. So really appreciate this presentation, Janelle. Thank you so much for sharing your research project with us. And hopefully we'll be able to have a follow-up at some point and learn more.
Yeah. Count me in. And thanks again for inviting me, and thanks to everyone who came to listen. Glad I could.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Hope to see you next week for our next presentation. Have a wonderful evening.
Yeah. Night.
Bye.